My name is Anna, and I never thought I'd be sharing this story. Truthfully, I've spent countless nights trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that maybe it was just a vivid dream brought on by trauma. But no matter how hard I try, I can't shake what I saw, what I felt, what I know. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that the truth has a way of demanding to be told. So here I am, telling it. Whether you believe me or not isn't something I can control. All I can do is lay it out the way it happened. It started like any other exhausting day. I just finished a double shift at the hospital. 12 hours of running from room to room, answering call lights, juggling patients, and trying to keep my mind off how much I missed my kids. It was a Friday night, and all I could think about was getting home, tucking them in, and collapsing into bed. The rain had been steady all day, and by the time my shift ended, the streets were dark and shiny, reflecting the glow of streetlights in long, golden streaks. It was the kind of night where the world seemed quieter, like even the rain was holding its breath. The drive home should have been routine. I'd done it 100 times before, and despite my exhaustion, I remember feeling strangely calm as I gripped the wheel. I turned on the radio, the soft hum of static filling the car as I flipped through stations, looking for something to keep me awake. The road was mostly empty, just me and the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the darkness. For a moment, I felt like the world belonged only to me. I didn't know then that everything was about to change. It happened so fast. One moment, I was glancing at the clock on my dashboard, mentally calculating how long it would take to get home. The next, there was a blinding flash of headlights, the screech of tires, and a deafening crash that seemed to split the air itself. The impact was so violent, it felt like the world had been turned upside down. I remember the sound of glass shattering, metal crunching, and my own gasp as my chest slammed into the seatbelt. Then everything went quiet. Not just quiet, but silent, a silence so complete it was like the world had been muted. I opened my eyes, or at least I think I did, and for a moment I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My car was crumpled like an accordion, the windshield spider-webbed with cracks, rain pouring through the gaps. My hands were still clutching the wheel, but they didn't feel like my hands. I tried to move, but nothing happened. Panic gripped me as I realized I couldn't feel my body. My chest wasn't rising or falling. I wasn't breathing, and yet I was still here. It's hard to explain what happened next, but I'll try. One moment I was in my body, trapped in the wreckage, and the next I was above it, looking down. I could see everything. The twisted metal, the rain-soaked pavement, the way my body hung limply in the driver's seat. Blood trickled from a gash on my forehead, mixing with the rainwater that pooled on the dashboard. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a movie or someone else's life. It wasn't me lying there. It couldn't be, and then came the light. It started as a faint glow, barely noticeable at first, but it grew brighter and warmer until it filled every corner of my vision. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen before. It didn't hurt to look at, and it didn't come from one direction. It was everywhere, surrounding me, wrapping me in a warmth that felt alive. The fear that had been bubbling in my chest dissolved, replaced by a peace so profound it brought tears to my eyes, if I even had eyes anymore. I felt weightless, like I was floating on a current that carried me away from the wreckage and into something much greater. That's when I heard the voice. Anna. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was more like a vibration that resonated through every part of me, as though the universe itself had spoken my name. I turned, or maybe I just thought about turning, and I saw him. I wish I could find the right words to describe what I saw, but everything I say feels inadequate. He was light and love and power all at once, a presence so overwhelming it made me want to fall to my knees, though I wasn't sure if I even had knees anymore. His eyes, they saw everything. Every thought, every fear, every mistake I'd ever made. There was no hiding, no pretense. I felt stripped bare, exposed in a way I'd never felt before. And yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only love. A love so pure it broke something inside me, something I didn't even know was broken. You are not done, he said, his voice gentle but firm. But before you return, there is something you must see. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask what he meant, but no words came. Instead, the light around us shifted, folding in on itself like the pages of a book being turned. Suddenly, I wasn't standing or floating or whatever I was doing next to him anymore. I was somewhere else entirely. At first, I thought I was back on Earth. The sky was blue, the sun shining, and people were walking the streets, going about their lives. But something was off. The air felt heavy, like it carried a weight I couldn't see. The people moved strangely, their faces blank, their eyes dull. It was like they were alive but not living. And then I noticed their hands. Everyone I saw had a mark on their right hand, a black, intricate symbol that pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive. I watched as a man walked up to a kiosk, placing his hand against a glowing scanner. The screen flashed green and he walked away with a bag of groceries. A woman did the same, but when her mark didn't register, an alarm blared. Within moments, 2 men in dark uniforms appeared, grabbing her by the arms and dragging her away. She screamed, but no one even glanced in her direction. It was as if they couldn't hear her or didn't care. "What is this?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. "This is what is to come." His voice resonated, steady but heavy with sorrow. I turned to see him standing beside me, though I couldn't say how long he'd been there. The scene before me continued, unchanging in its disturbing rhythm. People moved like clockwork, their steps precise, their expressions void of life. The mark on their hands seemed to glow faintly under the sunlight, like an ominous reminder of something deeper, something darker. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. "What is that mark? What does it mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. His gaze softened as he looked at me, but there was a gravity in his expression that made my chest tighten. "It is the mark of allegiance," he said. "A sign of surrender. Not to me, but to the one who seeks to deceive. It will be offered, not forced, and many will accept it without understanding the cost." I watched as more people moved through the streets, each interaction with the scanners seamless and efficient. The mark seemed to control everything. Transactions, access to buildings, even the ability to travel. It was clear that without it, life as they knew it wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. But why would they accept it? I asked, my voice rising with desperation. "Can't they see it's wrong? Can't they feel it?" He turned to face me fully, his presence radiating a quiet strength. "The deception will be great. It will not come as something evil or threatening. It will come as a solution, a promise of safety, convenience, and unity. It will appeal to their fears and their desires, offering what they believe they need most. But it is a lie." I shook my head, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The world looked so familiar, yet it was twisted in ways I couldn't fully understand. The people, their blank faces, their robotic movements, it was as if they'd given up their humanity. And then I noticed something else. Among the crowds, a few scattered individuals moved differently. Their faces were not blank, but filled with anguish and fear. They didn't have the mark. I watched as one of them, a young man clutching a worn leather bag, tried to slip through an alley unnoticed. He was thin, his clothes tattered, his eyes darting nervously. Just as he thought he'd escaped, a drone-like machine descended from the sky, emitting a sharp, shrill sound. Within moments, uniformed men appeared, their expressions cold and unyielding. The young man didn't even try to run. He just fell to his knees, clutching his hands together as if in prayer. I turned away, unable to watch what happened next. Why is this happening? Why isn't anyone fighting back? "They have been conditioned to believe they are powerless," he said. "Fear has silenced them. They do not realize that the choice to resist is still theirs." A heavy silence fell between us as I tried to process his words. My mind raced with questions, but one rose above all the rest. "What happens to the ones who take the mark?" His face darkened, and for the first time I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. "They will gain the world but lose their souls. The mark is more than a symbol. It is a covenant. Those who take it will sever themselves from me, choosing instead the path of the deceiver. It will cost them everything." My heart sank. I turned back to the vision before me, my stomach churning as I watched the ease with which people accepted the mark, the way they lined up willingly, their faces blank with compliance. It wasn't just the mark itself that terrified me. It was how ordinary it all seemed. There were no screams, no protests, just quiet, efficient submission. "But surely some will refuse," I said, clinging to the hope that not all would fall for the deception. "Yes," he said, and for a moment his tone softened. There will always be those who stand firm, who remain faithful, but their path will not be easy. They will be persecuted, rejected, and cast out. The world will see them as the enemy, as obstacles to peace and progress. Many will falter under the pressure. Even those who call themselves mine will be tempted. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. I thought of my own faith, my own life. Would I have the strength to resist, to stand firm in the face of such overwhelming opposition? I wanted to believe I would, but in that moment, I wasn't sure. He seemed to sense my doubt because he stepped closer, his presence enveloping me in a warmth that steadied my trembling soul. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice like a balm to my frayed nerves. "You were not shown this to fear but to prepare. The time is coming when all must choose, and the choice will not be easy, but I am with you always." I wanted to hold on to his words, to let them anchor me in the storm of emotions that raged within me. But then the vision shifted again. The peaceful streets transformed into scenes of chaos, fires burning, people screaming, the air thick with smoke and despair. Those without the mark were hunted, rounded up, and cast aside as if they were less than human. I felt tears streaming down my face, though I wasn't sure if I even had a face anymore. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Because you must warn them," he said. "The time is short. The deception coming is greater than you can imagine, and even the faithful will be tested. Tell them to stay vigilant, to remain rooted in me. My truth is the only shield against the lies that will come." I wanted to ask more, to beg him for answers, but before I could, the light around us began to fade. The vision blurred, and I felt a force pulling me back, away from him, away from the peace and the warmth. "Wait!" I cried out, reaching for him. "I'm not ready. Please don't let me go." But his final words echoed in my mind, steady and unchanging. "Warn them, Anna. Stand firm and tell them what you've seen." And then I was falling, plummeting back into the darkness, back into the chaos of the physical world. I woke to the piercing beeps of a heart monitor and the sterile scent of antiseptic. My chest ached, every breath feeling like fire coursing through my ribs. The world was blurry, spinning as I tried to focus on the bright overhead lights. It took me a moment to realize where I was, a hospital room. The faint hum of voices and the shuffle of footsteps outside the door grounded me just enough to recognize I was alive. Alive. My mind reeled as I tried to piece together what had just happened. The crash, the light, him. My heart raced, my pulse spiking on the monitor as fragments of the vision came rushing back in vivid detail. The people with the mark, the lifeless eyes, the voice telling me to warn them. I gripped the edge of the hospital bed, my knuckles white, as the weight of it all settled on me like a stone. "Anna." I turned to see my husband, Mark, standing in the doorway, his face pale and lined with worry. He rushed to my side, his hand trembling as it found mine. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice breaking. I thought I'd lost you." Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed his hand, my throat too tight to speak. Behind him, my two kids peeked into the room, their wide eyes full of fear and relief. The sight of them brought a fresh wave of emotion crashing over me, and I held out my arms, beckoning them closer. They ran to me, their small hands clutching at my arms and shoulders as if afraid I might disappear again. For a moment, I let myself get lost in the warmth of their embrace, the feel of their tiny fingers against my skin. But even as I held them, the vision lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow I couldn't escape. The mark. The warning. His words echoed in my soul like a drumbeat. "Warn them. Stand firm." Mark's voice broke through my thoughts. "The doctors said it was a miracle," he said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your car was totaled. They didn't think you'd make it, but you're here. You're alive." A miracle, that's what they called it, and maybe they were right. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a miracle, it was a mission. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days, though it felt like an eternity. My body ached, my mind raced, and sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The streets, the people, the mark. I heard his voice, steady and unwavering, urging me to share what I'd seen. But how could I? Who would believe me? On the second night, a nurse came to check on me. She was young, her kind eyes framed by dark curls that peeked out from under her cap. "You're lucky to be alive," she said softly as she adjusted the Roman 4 line in my arm. I hesitated, my heart pounding as I considered telling her. The words hovered on the tip of my tongue, but fear held me back. What if she thought I was crazy? What if she told the doctors? I bit my lip and nodded instead, letting the silence stretch between us. But as she turned to leave, she paused, glancing back at me. "Sometimes things happen for a reason," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe there's something you're meant to do with this second chance." Her words struck me like a lightning bolt, and I felt tears prick my eyes. She didn't know. She couldn't have known. But somehow it was exactly what I needed to hear. By the time I was discharged, I had made up my mind. I didn't know how or where to start, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. The message I'd been given wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. At home, things were different. Mark tried to act like everything was normal, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He kept hovering, asking if I needed anything, if I wanted to talk about what had happened. But every time I tried, the words got caught in my throat. How could I explain something so profound, so otherworldly, to someone who hadn't experienced it? One night, after the kids were asleep, I finally found the courage to tell him. We sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I clasped my hands together, staring at the worn wood of the tabletop as I began. "I saw him," I said quietly. Mark frowned, leaning closer. "Who?" "Jesus," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I saw him. He showed me what's coming." His face shifted, a mix of concern and disbelief. "Anna, you've been through a lot. The accident, the trauma. It's normal to have vivid dreams or—" "It wasn't a dream," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "It was real, Mark. I was there. I saw it." I told him everything, every detail I could remember. The mark, the people, the warnings. As I spoke, tears streamed down my face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally finished, I looked up to see his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Do you believe me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know you, Anna, and I know you wouldn't make something like this up." It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it was enough. In the days that followed, I began writing everything down, pouring my heart onto the pages of a worn notebook. The vision, his words, the urgency of the warning, it all spilled out, raw and unfiltered. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. The weight of the vision hasn't lessened, but I've learned to carry it. Every time I hear about a new technological breakthrough or see people glued to their screens, I feel a chill run down my spine. It's already beginning, just as he showed me. And now, as I sit here, pen in hand, I can only hope that by sharing this, someone will listen. Someone will be prepared. Because the time is short and the choice is coming, I didn't expect the resistance. I thought people would want to hear the truth, that they'd understand the urgency of what I was trying to say. But the moment I started sharing my experience, it became clear how wrong I was. The first time I tried to tell anyone outside my family, it was at church. Our congregation was small, just a couple dozen people gathered in the same pews every Sunday. They were people I'd known for years, friends, neighbors, even my kid's Sunday school teacher. If anyone would understand, I thought it would be them. I waited until the end of the service. Pastor Williams had just finished his sermon, a message about perseverance and faith, and I felt the timing was right. My heart pounded as I stood, clutching my notebook like a lifeline. "Pastor," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "may I share something with the congregation?" He hesitated, his brow furrowing, but then he nodded and stepped aside. "Of course, Anna, the floor is yours." As I walked to the front, the weight of 100 eyes fell on me. My palms were clammy and my knees felt like they might give out, but I pressed on. I opened the notebook and began to speak. At first, there was a hush in the room, a respectful silence as I described the accident, the light, and the overwhelming presence of peace. But as I delved into the vision, the mark, the warnings, the coming deception, the atmosphere shifted. People began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. I saw skeptical glances exchanged, frowns deepening, whispers starting to ripple through the congregation. By the time I finished, the silence wasn't reverent, it was cold. Pastor Williams cleared his throat, stepping back up beside me. "Thank you for sharing, Anna," he said, his tone measured. "That's certainly a lot to take in. But we must remember to test every spirit, as Scripture tells us, and to approach these things with discernment." It was a polite dismissal, but it stung like a slap. I could feel the judgment in the room, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Had I lost my mind? Was I making this up? I left quickly, brushing off Mark's attempts to console me. The whole ride home, I stared out the window, replaying the scene in my mind. Maybe it's just too much for them, Mark said gently, his hands gripping the steering wheel. People don't like to think about these kinds of things. It scares them. It should scare them, I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. That's the point. They need to know what's coming. But the truth was, his words struck a chord. Maybe it was too much. Maybe I was going about this the wrong way. In the weeks that followed, I tried other avenues. I joined online forums, wrote anonymous blog posts, even reached out to a few local reporters. The responses were mixed. Some people were intrigued, others hostile. A few accused me of fear-mongering or trying to push an agenda. Then one night, as I scrolled through yet another string of dismissive comments on an article I'd posted, I felt myself breaking. The weight of the vision, the responsibility of it was too much. I closed the laptop, pressing my hands to my face as tears streamed down my cheeks. "Why me?" I whispered into the empty room. "Why did you show me this if no one will listen?" I didn't expect an answer, but in the silence, a memory surfaced, his voice steady and sure. "Do not be afraid. You were not shown this to fear, but to prepare." Prepare. The word echoed in my mind, a spark of clarity breaking through the fog of doubt. Maybe my job wasn't to convince everyone. Maybe it wasn't about getting people to believe me right away. It was about planting seeds, about being obedient to the task I'd been given, no matter how hard it seemed. The next day, I picked up my notebook again. This time, I didn't write with the intent of sharing immediately. I just wrote to document, to preserve the details of the vision as clearly as I could. I poured everything onto the pages, the sights, the sounds, the emotions. Every detail I could recall, no matter how small, went into that notebook. And as I wrote, something shifted. The frustration and despair that had weighed me down began to lift, replaced by a quiet determination. I couldn't control how people responded, but I could control my faithfulness to the mission. A few weeks later, I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize. She'd read one of my blog posts and wanted to know more. Her message was short but sincere, filled with questions that mirrored the ones I'd asked him during the vision. I replied, sharing as much as I could. To my surprise, she wrote back almost immediately, thanking me and asking if we could pray together. It was a small thing, just one person out of the countless others who had dismissed me. But it felt like a breakthrough, a reminder that even the smallest ripple could grow into something larger. Since then, I've continued to share, one person at a time. It hasn't gotten easier. There are still skeptics, still moments when I wonder if I'm making any difference at all. But I hold on to his words, the promise that I'm not alone, that the work I'm doing matters even if I can't see the full picture. And every time I feel the doubt creeping in, I think of the people in the vision. The blank faces, the lifeless eyes. The ones who had taken the mark, unaware of the cost. And I remember why I have to keep going. Because the choice is coming and people need to know. The days blurred together as I settled into my new reality. Every morning, I woke with the same heaviness in my chest, a constant reminder of what I had seen. It was like carrying a fire that refused to burn out, no matter how much I wished for a reprieve. Mark did his best to support me. He didn't always understand, but he tried. He made sure the kids were taken care of so I could focus on what I believed I needed to do. I was grateful for him, but even with his help, I often felt alone. How could I not? The weight of the message I carried was isolating, a burden I couldn't fully share with anyone. One afternoon, as the kids napped and Mark worked in the garage, I sat at the dining table with my notebook spread open before me. I stared at the words I had written, descriptions of the vision, fragments of his voice, the faces of the people marked and unmarked. I had filled pages and pages, but it still felt incomplete, like I was missing something important. I closed my eyes and bowed my head, whispering a prayer. "Lord, I don't know what to do. I've tried to share, but no one wants to listen. If this is truly your message, show me how to deliver it. I can't do this alone." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer, but then, deep in my spirit, I felt a nudge, a quiet, insistent thought that wasn't my own. Go to the city. My eyes snapped open and my heart pounded. The city, which city? What was I supposed to do there? But as the thought settled in my mind, I knew it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. That evening, I told Mark. "I need to go," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up from his work, confusion clouding his face. "Go where?" "To the city," I said, clutching the notebook to my chest. "I don't know why, but I feel like he's telling me to go." Mark's brow furrowed, and he set down the wrench he'd been holding. "Anna, are you sure about this? What are you hoping to accomplish?" "I don't know," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "But I have to trust him. He showed me for a reason, and I can't just sit here waiting for answers. I need to act." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's dangerous out there. You've seen the news. Protests, unrest, people on edge. What if something happens to you?" I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "I'll be careful, but I can't let fear stop me. If I don't do this, I'll never forgive myself." After a long pause, he nodded reluctantly. "All right. I don't fully understand, but I'll support you. Just promise me you'll be safe." The next morning, I packed a small bag and left. The drive into the city was nerve-wracking, the highways crowded with cars and the streets buzzing with tension. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of unrest, graffiti on buildings, groups of people arguing on street corners, the occasional flash of police lights in the distance. I didn't know where to go, so I parked near the downtown square and began walking, clutching my notebook like a talisman. My steps felt guided, though I didn't know by what. I prayed silently as I moved, asking for clarity, for direction. It wasn't long before I came across a group of people gathered near the fountain in the square. They were listening to a man who stood on a makeshift platform, his voice booming through a handheld microphone. "They want to control you," he shouted, his face red with passion. "They want to strip you of your freedom, your identity." "Don't let them." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others shouting their support. I stopped at the edge of the group, my heart pounding. The man's words resonated with what I had seen, though he seemed to be speaking in generalities, warnings about government overreach, surveillance, and loss of liberty. I didn't know what compelled me, but before I realized what I was doing, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. The man turned, his gaze sharp. "Yes, do you have something to add?" The crowd's eyes turned to me and my throat tightened. But then I remembered his words, his command to share what I had seen. "I need to tell you something," I said, louder now. "I had a vision. A warning. And it's not just about freedom or control, it's about our souls." The crowd murmured, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The man gestured for me to step up, handing me the microphone. My hands shook as I took it, but as soon as I started speaking, a calm washed over me. I told them everything, the accident, the light, the vision. I described the people marked and unmarked, the lifelessness in their eyes, and the voice that warned me of the coming deception. The crowd was silent, hanging on my every word. When I finished, a woman in the front spoke up. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do we resist?" I took a deep breath, clutching the microphone tightly. "We have to stay rooted in our faith," I said. "We have to discern the truth from the lies, no matter how convincing they seem. And we have to choose, every day, to follow him no matter the cost." For the first time, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe they wouldn't all believe me, but some of them would. And that was enough to keep me going. As I stepped down from the makeshift platform, my legs felt like jelly. The weight of what I had just shared still hung heavily in the air, and the crowd seemed to ripple with a mix of emotions: fear, confusion, and, in some, a glimmer of hope. The woman who had asked the question earlier approached me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with lines etched deep into her face that hinted at a hard life. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "I've been feeling like something's coming, something I couldn't put into words, but hearing you, it's like pieces are falling into place." Her words took me by surprise, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "You're not alone," I said, my voice soft but steady. "None of us are, as long as we hold on to him." Others began to gather around us, asking questions, sharing their fears, and even thanking me for speaking up. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. For the first time since the vision, I felt like I wasn't shouting into the void. But the moment didn't last. The sound of sirens cut through the air, sharp and piercing. The crowd tensed, heads turning in unison toward the street where a line of black SUVs and police vehicles had just pulled up. "What's going on?" someone whispered. Before anyone could answer, uniformed officers began to pour out of the vehicles, their faces set with grim determination. They moved quickly, forming a perimeter around the square. The tension in the crowd escalated instantly, shifting from curiosity to outright fear. "This is an unauthorized gathering," one of the officers announced through a megaphone. "Disperse immediately or you will be detained." The crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted in protest, some arguing with the officers, others running for cover. I froze, clutching my notebook to my chest as panic surged through me. "Come on," the older woman said, grabbing my arm. "We need to get out of here." I nodded, letting her pull me away from the square. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the commotion behind us. The weight of my notebook pressed against my chest like a physical reminder of everything at stake. We ducked into an alley, pressing ourselves against the cold brick wall as officers moved past, their radios crackling with clipped commands. My breaths came in short gasps, and I struggled to steady myself. "Why are they doing this?" the woman asked, her voice a mixture of anger and fear. "We weren't hurting anyone." I shook my head, unable to find the words, but deep down I knew. This was exactly what I had seen in the vision. Control, suppression, the slow erosion of freedom disguised as order. When the chaos finally died down, we slipped out of the alley and made our way to a nearby park. The woman introduced herself as Lorraine, and as we sat on a bench beneath the fading light of the afternoon, she told me about her life, about the loss of her husband, her estranged children, and the gnawing feeling that the world was changing in ways she couldn't understand. "You're brave," she said after a long silence. "Standing up there saying what you did, I don't think I could have done it." "I don't feel brave," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to be obedient, but sometimes I feel so small, like what I'm doing doesn't matter." Lorraine reached over, placing a hand on mine. "It matters," she said firmly. "You mattered to me today, and I think you'll matter to a lot more people than you realize." Her words stuck with me as I made my way back to my car. The streets were quieter now, the tension from earlier still lingering like a shadow. I felt drained, but a strange sense of peace had settled over me as well. When I finally got home, Mark was waiting for me at the door, his face etched with worry. "I saw the news," he said, pulling me into his arms. "They said there was some kind of protest in the square. Were you there?" I nodded, burying my face in his chest. "It wasn't a protest, at least not at first. I had to speak, Mark. I had to tell them." He sighed, holding me tighter. "I'm glad you're okay, but you have to be careful, Anna. The world isn't the same anymore. People don't want to hear the truth, not when it threatens their comfort." "I know," I said, pulling back to look at him. "But I can't stop. I can't ignore what I saw." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought about Lorraine and the others who had listened to me. I thought about the officers and the fear that had gripped the crowd. And I thought about the vision, the faces of the marked, the voice that had warned me. The choice wasn't coming. It was already here. The days after the square felt surreal, as though I were walking a tightrope between two realities, the ordinary world of daily life and the shadow of the vision that constantly loomed in my mind. The memory of the crowd stayed with me, their faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. But what haunted me most were the officers, their swift and mechanical response, and how closely it mirrored what I had seen. I tried to go back to normal, making breakfast for the kids, folding laundry, sitting with Mark in the evenings. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was running out of time. Everywhere I turned, I saw signs. News reports about rising unrest, debates about new technological policies, whispers of global changes that felt eerily aligned with the warning I'd been given. One evening, as I scrolled through the news on my phone, a headline caught my attention. It was about a new biometric identification system being rolled out in several major cities. The article called it a revolutionary advancement, promising greater convenience and security. My stomach churned as I read the details. It wasn't just about fingerprints or facial recognition. This system integrated everything, financial accounts, medical records, even personal history, into a single, scannable mark. The words blurred on the screen as my pulse quickened. It wasn't exactly like what I'd seen in the vision, but it was close enough to make my chest tighten with dread. The idea of the mark, of people willingly tying their lives to something so invasive, felt like the first domino tipping over. I needed to talk to someone, anyone. I opened my contacts and scrolled through the list, hesitating before landing on Lorraine's number. She'd given it to me before we parted ways, insisting that I call if I ever needed anything. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Anna," she asked, her voice warm but slightly cautious. "It's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk. Do you have time?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Come by, I'll put on some tea." I arrived at her small apartment an hour later, the city lights twinkling through the windows as I sat on her worn couch. Lorraine handed me a mug of tea and sat across from me, her expression soft and patient. "I saw something today," I began, gripping the mug tightly. "An article about a new ID system. It's biometric, integrated. It feels too close to what I saw in the vision." She nodded slowly, her brow furrowing. "I read about that too. People are saying it's the future, that it'll solve so many problems, but it doesn't sit right with me either." I leaned forward, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. What if this is how it starts? What if this is the beginning of the mark? Lorraine's eyes searched mine, her face pale but resolute. "Then we have to be ready," she said quietly. "We have to warn people, help them see what's happening." I hesitated, my throat tightening. "But what if they don't listen? Most people think I'm crazy, Lorraine. Even Mark struggles to believe me sometimes." She reached out, placing a hand over mine. "People might not listen at first, but that doesn't mean you stop speaking the truth. You've already reached some, Anna. I saw it in their faces that day in the square. You planted a seed, and sometimes that's all you can do." Her words settled over me like a blanket, comforting but heavy with responsibility. That night as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Lorraine had said. Seeds. Maybe that was my purpose. Not to convince everyone, but to plant the truth wherever I could and trust that it would grow in its own time. The next morning, I decided to take action. I created a small blog and began writing about my experience. I wrote about the vision, about the warning, and about the importance of discernment and faith. I poured my heart into every post, knowing that even if only one person read it, it would be worth it. At first, the responses were few. A handful of strangers left comments, some supportive, others skeptical. But as the days turned into weeks, the blog began to gain traction. People started sharing their own experiences, their own fears and doubts about the world's direction. One comment stood out to me. It came from a man named Daniel. "Anna," he wrote, "I've been having dreams that align with what you've described. I've been too afraid to share them, but reading your words has given me courage. Please keep writing. The world needs voices like yours." Tears welled in my eyes as I read his message. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that the vision wasn't just mine to carry. But as the blog grew, so did the pushback. Anonymous comments began to appear, accusing me of fear-mongering or spreading conspiracy theories. Some were harsher, calling me dangerous or delusional. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the comments, Mark came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. "It's just hard. Some people are so angry. I don't understand why they won't even consider what I'm saying." He squeezed my shoulder, his voice firm but kind. "People don't like being shaken out of their comfort zones. But you're doing the right thing, Anna. Even if it's hard, even if it hurts, you're doing what he asked of you." His words were a balm to my weary soul. I leaned my head against his arm, grateful for his unwavering support. As the days continued, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world might not want to hear the truth, but I would keep speaking it. Because in the end, it wasn't about me. It was about him and the message he had entrusted to me. And no matter how difficult the road became, I knew I couldn't turn back. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of growing tension. Each day seemed to bring with it another piece of the puzzle. Another warning, another sign that things were changing in ways no one could fully grasp. I spent hours each day updating my blog, researching new developments, and connecting with people who had reached out. Many shared their own disturbing dreams and visions, their own fears about the world's direction. Some, like Daniel, were already awake to the reality of what was happening, but many others were still in the dark. They questioned everything, struggling to make sense of the shifting landscape, and I knew the truth was becoming harder and harder for them to accept. But the biggest shock came when I received an email from someone claiming to be a government insider. At first, I thought it was a prank or a scam, one of those emails promising some grand conspiracy theory or desperate plea for attention. But as I read through it, something inside me clicked. The email was detailed, specific, and chilling. It spoke of the biometric identification system that was rapidly expanding across cities, not just for identification purposes, but as a tool for monitoring and controlling the population. The sender, who identified themselves only as Agent X, claimed that the system was being rolled out in stages, beginning with the simplest implementations: financial tracking, medical records, and personal data storage. But the ultimate goal was far more sinister: the mark. The email detailed plans for integrating a system that would be mandatory for all citizens, a digital mark that could not only track every action but also control behavior. It would tie individuals to the government's technological system, requiring them to accept certain conditions in order to buy food, access health care, or even work. The final step, according to the email, was to embed the mark into every person's body, ensuring that those who resisted would be left out of society completely. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine as I read through the email again, this time slowly, absorbing each word. The vision, the warning, it was all coming true. And the reality of it, the cold, calculated nature of it, sent a wave of fear through me. I had to do something. I had to warn people. But how, as I sat there staring at the screen, my thoughts raced. Could I trust this email? Was it really from someone who knew the truth, or was it just more paranoia feeding into the chaos? There was no way to know for sure. But something told me that I couldn't ignore it. I shared the email on my blog, carefully stripping away any identifying information that could potentially harm the sender. I wrote a post alongside it, urging everyone to prepare, to stay vigilant, and to keep their eyes open for the signs of the mark being forced on society. I didn't know what would come of it, but I knew I had to act. The fallout came quickly. The post exploded across the internet, spreading faster than I could have imagined. People were divided. Some hailed it as a wake-up call, while others lashed out, calling it a baseless conspiracy. I could see the debates unfold in real time, heated arguments between those who believed and those who refused to consider the possibility. The backlash was fierce. Within days, my social media accounts were flooded with threatening messages. Some people told me to stop spreading fear, others threatened violence. The authorities, too, were watching closely. One evening, as I was responding to comments, Mark came over to sit beside me. He was holding his phone, his face pale. "They've flagged your post," he said quietly. "The government's monitoring your blog now. They're going to start cracking down on people like you." I looked up at him, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. The weight of it all pressed down on me, and for a moment I thought about giving up. "Maybe they're right," I said, my voice shaky. "Maybe I'm just making things worse." Mark shook his head, his expression firm. "No. You're telling the truth, and people need to hear it. You've already helped more than you realize." "But at what cost?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happens if they come after me? What happens to you, to the kids?" Mark took my hands in his grip steady. "We're in this together, Anna. I don't care what happens, we'll face it as a family, but you can't back down now." His words gave me the strength I needed. I knew he was right, even though every instinct screamed at me to run and hide. The world was changing, and there was no turning back. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if this was the beginning of something bigger or if I was simply a voice in the wilderness. But I did know one thing for sure. I couldn't stop now. The warning had been given. The truth was out there, and I couldn't be silent anymore. As the days wore on, the attacks on my blog intensified. I was labeled a threat by some, a prophet by others, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had done what I was called to do. And in the quiet moments, when the weight of the world felt too much to bear, I would hear that voice again, the voice that had guided me in the vision, the one that had told me the deception would be greater than I could imagine. It was a reminder that we were all being tested, that the choice was here, not tomorrow, but today. and that no matter how difficult it became, no matter how hard the world tried to bury the truth, we had to stand firm. I didn't know how much longer I had. I didn't know how far this fight would go, but I knew this. No matter what happened next, I was ready. Days turned into weeks, and the world around me continued its relentless march forward, indifferent to the storm I felt brewing inside me. I had warned people. I had shared the truth of what I had seen and what I knew, but it felt like the weight of it all was bearing down on me more than ever. The emails, the blog posts, the constant barrage of comments from strangers who either believed or condemned me. Every single one of them seemed like a small piece of a much larger puzzle, one that I wasn't sure I could solve. I couldn't stop the overwhelming sense of dread that crept into my mind as I saw the changes happening in society. The integration of biometric systems into everyday life continued to accelerate. New policies were passed, mandates for digital identification were pushed forward, and the pressure to comply grew with each passing day. I watched as people around me slowly began to accept it without truly questioning what they were giving up. Mark and I talked about it often, but even he began to show signs of doubt. He'd always been supportive, but the tension of it all had started to erode his optimism. "Maybe you're wrong," he'd say after dinner, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. "Maybe this is just progress. Maybe it's not the end of the world." His words stung, not because I thought he was wrong, but because they echoed the same doubts that others had voiced. And deep down, I wasn't sure anymore. Could I have misinterpreted the vision? Could the mark really be something else? One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation with Mark, I walked out onto our balcony, needing a moment alone. The sky above was dark, the stars barely visible through the light pollution of the city, and I felt small beneath its vastness. The air was cool against my skin, but my heart was heavy, a weight I could no longer ignore. It was then that I heard it, a voice soft and familiar, calling to me from the depths of my soul. "Anna." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was the same voice I had heard during my near-death experience. It had been years, but the sound of it was unmistakable. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding as I steadied myself against the railing. "Is it you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Always," came the reply, gentle but filled with infinite love. "Why is this happening?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why is it so hard to stand firm?" "People don't listen. I'm losing everything. I don't know if I can do this anymore." The voice paused for a moment, as though gathering strength before speaking again. "You are not alone, Anna. Do not fear. The path will be difficult, but it is necessary. The truth must be heard, and you are the one who has been chosen to carry it." I shook my head, tears spilling from my eyes. "But what if I fail? What if I can't reach them? What if everything I've done is for nothing?" "You will not fail," the voice replied, unwavering. "Your task is not to control the outcome, but to speak, to stand firm. The seeds you plant will grow, even if you do not see them bloom." I let the words wash over me, and for the first time in weeks, a sense of peace began to settle in my heart. It wasn't an easy peace. There were still doubts, still fears. But I understood now that the weight wasn't mine to carry alone. "You must be vigilant, Anna," the voice continued. "The deception will only grow stronger, but so will the strength of those who remain true. Keep your faith and know that I am with you always." With that, the voice faded, leaving behind a profound silence that seemed to echo in my soul. The fear that had gripped me moments before was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady determination. I turned back toward the apartment, my heart lighter than it had been in days. Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, clearly lost in thought. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes searching mine. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. I smiled, a small but genuine smile, and sat beside him. "I'm okay. I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. Maybe we can start talking to people in person. You know, outside the blog, have small conversations, share what we've learned, what we've seen." I nodded, feeling the strength of that quiet resolve fill me. "I think that's a good idea. Maybe we can make a difference, even if it's just one person at a time." Mark took my hand, his grip warm and comforting. "We'll do it together." And so the work began. It wasn't easy. Every conversation felt like a small battle, a challenge to break through the walls of fear and disbelief that so many people had built around themselves. But we did it, one person at a time. We shared the truth, shared our story, and slowly, one by one, people began to listen. But the world continued to change around us. The mark, though still in its infancy, was beginning to show its true form. People were more and more required to embrace the system, and resistance seemed futile. The pressure mounted, the deception deepened. But with each new challenge, I found a new strength in myself, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I didn't know what the future held. The path ahead was uncertain and the stakes had never been higher. But I knew one thing for sure: I would keep speaking. I would keep warning. I would stay vigilant no matter what, because the truth, once revealed, could never be taken back. And no matter how hard it was, I had to carry it. For as long as I was able, I continued to stand firm in my mission, but the strain was beginning to show. The weight of the truth I carried, of everything I had seen, of everything I was trying to prevent, became more suffocating with each passing day. The mark was no longer just a possibility, it was becoming an inescapable reality. The systems were already in place, the infrastructure was set, and the push to normalize it was everywhere. People didn't even realize they were walking into a trap. They thought it was just another convenience, another way to make life easier and safer. I had to fight harder now than ever before to get through to anyone. There were moments when the effort felt futile. The world was becoming so consumed by its own self-interest, by its distractions, by the sheer weight of technology, that people couldn't fathom the consequences. They couldn't see that something as simple as a digital convenience was slowly becoming a chain around their necks. And every time I spoke out, every time I tried to wake them up, the resistance was stronger. The government grew more aggressive in its control. Extremists, conspiracy theorists, these were the terms they used to silence us. They painted us as dangerous, untrustworthy, even insane. Mark, ever supportive, was by my side, but even his optimism was starting to wane. He saw the same signs I did, the growing fear in people's eyes when they were confronted with the reality of the mark. How many times had we tried to warn people, only to have them shut us out or lash out in anger? I couldn't help but feel it was becoming a losing battle. But still, I refused to back down. I couldn't betray what I had seen, what I knew. One afternoon, I received a call that I had been dreading. It was from an old friend, Sarah, who I hadn't heard from in months. Her voice was shaky, filled with panic, and I could hear the fear in her words. "Anna, you need to listen to me. Something's happening. I think they've found out. I think they know what we've been doing, what we've been saying. Please, you have to be careful." My pulse quickened. "Sarah, what's going on? What's happening?" "I don't know how much time I have. I can't say too much over the phone, but I've been watching. The government is tightening its grip. People who have been speaking out, people like you, they're disappearing. I think they're targeting us now. You have to lay low. You have to get out, please." My stomach dropped. "Disappear? But Sarah, I'm not just going to run. I can't, I won't." Her voice broke. "Please, Anna, it's not worth it. They'll come for you. I don't want to see you get hurt. I just want you to be safe." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run, to take Mark and the kids and go somewhere far away, somewhere safe. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the truth, the part that had felt the weight of that divine calling, I couldn't abandon it. I couldn't give up now, not when everything was starting to come to a head. "I can't do that, Sarah. I can't just turn my back on everything I've learned, on everything I've seen." "I know," she whispered. "I know, but just promise me you'll be careful, please." "I promise," I said, though the promise felt hollow. How could I promise to be careful when I knew that I had no control over what was coming? How could I promise that I would keep my family safe when I knew the very system that was growing stronger every day would soon be unstoppable? I hung up the phone, my heart racing. I couldn't shake the fear that had taken hold of me. I had already seen glimpses of what was coming, the devastation, the loss, the total control. But now, the danger felt real. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The mark wasn't just a future threat. It was becoming a present reality, and soon it would be too late to escape. I turned to Mark, who was sitting across the room, his face drawn with worry. He knew something was wrong. I could see it in his eyes. He'd been watching the changes around us just as I had. We had talked about the dangers of the system, the way it was creeping into every corner of our lives. But now it was no longer hypothetical. It was happening. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. "They know," I said, the words escaping me before I could stop them. They know what we've been doing, they know we've been warning people, and now they're coming for us." Mark didn't speak at first, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He was trying to process it, trying to find a way to protect us, to make everything okay. But we both knew there was no easy answer. The power that was rising, the forces that were working against us, they were too strong. "I'll protect you," Mark finally said, his voice low but resolute. "I'll keep you safe." "I won't let them take you." "I'm not afraid of them," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm afraid of what happens if we let them win. I'm afraid of what happens if we don't stand up. This is bigger than us, Mark. It's bigger than anything we could ever imagine." For a moment, we both sat in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on us. I knew we couldn't run. I knew that even if we tried to hide, the mark would still find its way into every corner of our lives. The only choice was to stand firm, to continue fighting, to continue warning people no matter the cost. I reached out, taking Mark's hand in mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Not because I had all the answers, not because I knew what was coming next, but because I knew that as long as we were together, we could face whatever lay ahead. "You're right," I said softly. "We won't back down, not now, not ever. If this story moved you, please share it and help others stay vigilant and faithful. The truth is out there, and together, we can stand firm in the face of what's coming."